Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This is the final video in my series on how to plan your washes and how to manage edges in a complex watercolour painting. In this video, I'm going to be finishing off the painting and putting quite a bit of detail in, but to be honest, most of the main learning points that I've hoped to cover in this series, we've covered already. Certainly with regards to planning the main washes and how finding the right sequence for those enables us to manage the edges that we have in the painting, where we're keeping some hard edges, where we're losing edges. And so I'll be finishing off details around the focal point and in some other areas of the painting too. And I will show you and talk you through a few little techniques that I like to use when I get to this stage in a complex painting. But before I get into the painting, I just want to say a big thank you to all of you that have watched this series, that have commented on the videos. That's really been much appreciated, and apologies that I haven't been able to answer all of those, but I really appreciate seeing them and reading them, and it's great to see how you've interacted with this series, and it's nice to know that many of you have found it to be helpful. In particular, a big thank you to my patrons who support me on Patreon, and it enables me to make series like this. As a thank you, once this series has been completed, then it will be uploaded to Patreon, interruption free, and will be sitting there as a useful resource. And then to my patrons, we'll also be continuing with the course that I have on my Patreon page, which is how to take your landscape painting to the next level. We're coming to the end of module number 2, which is called the Challenge of Landscape Painting. I've got a couple of quick videos to shoot now that the weather's got a little bit better and I'm back in the UK. And so they will be coming shortly. And then we're moving into module number 3, where we will look at how to design paintings using colour, composition and contrast as creative tools. If you're interested in that and would like some more details, I'll put a link in the description to my Patreon site. Okay, so back to the painting. I'm really looking forward to finishing off this wonderful scene of the River Arun in Sussex. If you've followed the series from the beginning, you will have seen that I've built this scene up from some very basic washes at the start, using a wet-on-wet technique to establish the brightest, the palest tones in the painting. And then I've built that up by using a combination of wet on dry washes, wet to wet washes, and also some glazing over areas of the painting to help manage the edges, often using a negative painting technique. There's little more to say at this point, so let's get started with the painting. Okay, so pretty much the whole paper's been covered. I've brought as much of the painting forward as I can to a point where it's just about finishing this off with some details. But before I get stuck in with my rigger brush and put lots of little fine marks here and there, what I like to do is just take a moment to see whether or not there are any areas in the painting that need any sort of significant adjustment. Certainly if I need to put a glaze on or something like that, now is the time to do it. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think there is too much to do. What I might do is just suggest the top edge to this fence. I think I'm going to introduce some nice tonal counterchange along here, where I've got a dark bit of fence with a lighter area of tree on top of it. And then I might just darken off this area here over a lighter area of fence, and I think that might be quite a nice effect. So that's one area that requires a little bit of adjustment. I'm also going to put some darker values on top of some of these supports and jetties and planks and things that have been left here, just to take away the very obvious nature of it and just help it to settle back a little and look as though it is more part of the riverbank, and it will give it a greater sense of realism. So that will work well too. Okay, so let's just put in this darker area of fence here and paint in the direction of the slats in the fence. You don't have to paint every single one in, but just by leaving a little gap here and there, it looks nice. It looks like a fence. Just going to lighten that up a little as I come over here. Okay, that's fine on that side, but now on this side I would like to suggest that the fence is there by darkening the tree behind it, or the base of the tree behind it, and using a negative painting technique, as I have done in numerous other places here around these posts, around this area of the tree, around the grass here and on the bank over here too. It will suggest the top line of the fence as it disappears into those trees there. Now, to do this, you have to be very careful. And what I'm going to do is wet this area with perfectly clear water. It can't be muddy at all. And apply plenty of it. Stretching way past the area that you are going to paint into, so that the paint doesn't just run up and stop. So give yourself plenty of room to maneuver here. And then with this darker shadow colour that I've mixed up, I'm just going to drop that into this tree. It may actually need to be a little bit darker than that. But you can see here that it's going to run down into that water that I've painted on. And I'm giving a edge to the fence, and then it disappears into the tree there. Okay, now I want a really dark, sticky value for that colour, just so I can touch it in a few places. And suggest one or two slats in the fence. Let's have a little gap in there, that looks quite nice. And there we are, that's given some definition to the fence. I really like the tonal counter change here. Light tree, dark fence, dark tree, light fence. It's still the same fence, it's still the same bank of trees, but that tonal counter change just gives some strong visual interest in that area. Okay, so now let's put a little bit more shade and modelling onto the fence, the jetties, the supports, all that mess over this side of the painting. I'm just going to start off with some shadow through here. And then it's a little darker in here as well, so let's put something in there. Leave some of your base wash showing through, that always looks nice. That doesn't though if you come over the top of that rail that's meant to be there. Concentrate, Oliver, concentrate. Now you can see what I'm doing here is I'm leaving some gaps between this wash and the background behind it. But I'm not worried about there being glaring white gaps, because my base wash, if you remember going several videos back, of this bright orange colour that I dropped in, is going to show through. That just suggests a highlight on some of these supports. It's not as obvious and glaring as just leaving a piece of white paper, so I don't have an overlap there. This is why we plan our washes. We think ahead so that we can have nice little eventualities like this. So I need it to be quite a bit darker here, and I'm just going to come down to this support that runs across, or handrail I suppose it is. To be perfectly honest, none of this stuff should have formal descriptions, because it's been put together by a bunch of guys with a few spare planks of wood, a few nails. Nice way to spend the afternoon, but yeah, trying to describe it accurately is probably a little bit pointless. Let's put one in there as well to separate those two, and then much the same over here. But you can see here there's several slats that are quite evident, so let's make sure that they show through. then it's all getting quite dark and difficult to distinguish exactly what's going on as we come down through here. I think there's a little bit of shadow from this ladder here, but actually, to be honest, that's going to be too much detail. We don't need that there. Let's just get rid of it. Let's bring these down. I'm using a damp brush now just to bring this down over the other areas of dark. Use a finger, smudge it, and that edge is gone. Now there's dark also in some of these supports here, but light along the top in places. Now I'm happy to come down over this darker area, and you can see it creates a darker line underneath, but that's quite nice. I quite like that because it looks as though it's a darker area underneath this little walkway here. And this is where an overlap can sometimes work in your benefit. It saves you actually painting a darker line underneath there. And then there's all manner of things going on here. We don't want to be too fussy about that, but let's just finish that off like so. It's very dark back in this corner here where it runs into the bank. This just needs knocking back with a shadow colour, so let's put a little glaze over the top there. Bring it down here. And I'm going to get some clear water and paint it onto the ladder. And just put in some darker shadow colour down here. And I'm doing that so that that dark colour runs up without a hard edge. And then you can see it's quite dark here too, so just a little bit of light on the top there, but the rest can disappear. And because it's dark here, I can just paint this down. I'm not worried about matching up those two edges. I can come down here. Just adds a little bit of extra texture to the bank. I'm using a damp brush now to blend some of that out. And there we are. Just continue that along until it sort of disappears into the light, and that's nice. There's a few darker posts in here too, so just put a simple wash over the top of those. It just knocks them back a little bit. Darker through here too. And just leave some areas bright, some areas in shade. It just looks less uniform if you're able to do that. Let's run that into there and have that disappearing into the grass. Nice. So I'm just going to let that all dry, and then I can put some additional detail there. Some additional detail on the boats. That will cover off the centre of interest in the painting, and then it will allow me to consider where, if anywhere, I need to put some additional marks or some additional detail. I'm thinking perhaps a very small amount on the farm at the top of the hill, maybe 1 or 2 marks to pick out some detail on the bank, but it's literally going to be no more than that. So time for a cuppa. Let it dry and I'll come back to it shortly. Okay, so let's put some detail into the boats. We've got this little radar cover on this boat here. And what I want to do is put this in a darker value than the bank. I was going to leave it brighter, but it's actually registering quite nicely there in a darker tone. Bit of detail on some of the superstructure here on the boat, not too much. That one's in the distance, so it doesn't need too much work. Perhaps a bit of shadow in there. Again, not much in this little one that's down here. Just a few marks that helps this to come alive. When you're putting in these detailed marks, don't be tempted to put them all in a dark or a very heavy colour, particularly not a black. That goes without saying, but if you're always painting everything in a dark or a very dark value when you put the detail in, and certainly if you're using all the same hue, then it starts to look a bit odd. In fact, it starts to look as though you're painting in line and wash, where you put a pen over the top of your watercolour, and that doesn't look quite right. So be quite dynamic with your brush strokes, but also vary the colours that you're using just slightly. So think about using a dark shadow colour or a dark neutral. I've got ultramarine mixed up with warm sepia there, but anything like burnt umber, burnt sienna is fine. And it just gives a little bit of variety to what you're doing. In fact, it often pays to just pick up different colours off the palette that you mixed previously for a different part of the painting. That helps you to give the variety that will make the painting look good. Now we've got this little bit of structure that comes over the top here. I want to be fairly careful with that. Little bit of definition to the awning on top of the boat here. A little bit of detail just here. I think there's a little bit of shadow just in here actually. Yeah. And while I've got that nice burnt sienna colour there on the palette, I'm going to put in the post here that I rather liked from the outset. It's just got a nice warm colour to it where it's rusted. It's obviously a metal support, but it just looks quite nice there with that warm colour. There we are. Okay, now I've got quite a few little areas here that are wet and in the process of drying. I can never remember exactly where they are, and so I'm not going to start here because I know that I will just go and put my fist in it and then put it down in the middle of the river here, and well, let's not even go there. So I'm just going to let that dry up, and then I'll carry on with this area here, and we're pressing on, we're getting there. Okay, let's finish off this area over on the right hand side here. I'm just going to put a few marks in to define some of these supports. Now what I'm doing at this point is paying very little attention to the reference image. I'm looking at my painting and asking myself the question, where does it need something? Where do I need to put a bit of work? And that helps me to simplify. It means that I'm not constantly transferring detail from the reference image into the painting. You can end up doing far too much. And so just a suggestion of rungs on that ladder. It's quite close to the right hand side of the painting here, so I don't want this to be too obvious. I need to keep it fairly quiet. And then with the rigger brush, I'm just going to put in some extra details. Let's have something up here. That is registering darker, and that makes quite a nice contrast with the sunlit grass behind it. There's a diagonal there. Similar thing going on up here. Okay, I'm just switching up to a slightly larger brush. I'm going to put in a couple of darks in the background here. Now what I need to do is suggest these steps on this ladder here. Again, I'm going to start off painting that negatively. So I'm painting the actual rungs in the ladder by not painting them, but by painting the spaces in between them. And I can do that because that initial wash that I put in several videos back is already there. And I'm just putting darker values around these. But then as I come down here, I don't want to spell too many of them out. I might put a lighter one in down here with some titanium white or something like that, but we need to start phasing these out at some point. It's the same way when you're painting windows. You don't want to paint every single little frame around the glass or every single little pane of glass in a complex window. It just doesn't look good. So be careful that you don't overwork things and that you add some suggestion into this. Okay, I might come back to this in due course when I've put some detail into other areas. I don't know. We will just have to see what it looks like. But I think it's going to work as it is. There probably needs to be very little extra done in this area. So let's move on. Okay, so I just want to put a few more ripples across the river here, just running through these reflections that are already there. And I want to reflect some of the posts down into that too. So let's come around the side of the boat here. Remember, ripples run across. That's a nice broken edge there. I don't want to disturb that. Let's leave it as it is, and we'll carry a few more just across the river. Perfect. Now I'm just waiting for this to not quite dry, but become almost dry, and then I can softly reflect these posts here. I think we're probably about there, and I'll just do a very quick mark down like that and like that. And you see they're just fuzzing out a little bit. Then what I can do is pick up some more of this blue, and we'll carry this on a little bit as a harder edge through here. And through there. Drag them down with the finger. And they're reflecting really nicely. I've got them soft through the ripple, harder through the calmer water. That just works nicely. I've got a combination of a soft shape there and a hard one there. These type of contrasts just look great in a watercolour. I mustn't get too carried away with these ripples, but I think there is some room for a little more. Yeah. Now there is a dark post in here. It's a lot thicker than I've put in, and it's reflecting down here. But I don't want it to be too prominent, otherwise it's just going to start to look a bit too busy through here. So we'll make a suggestion that it's there. Just something like that. That's okay. That post is reflecting down here. That's fine. This one is probably lost somewhere behind the boat. I think that's probably all we need to do with regard to reflections. What I do want to do now is pick out some highlights that are just too difficult to paint round in the course of a painting. So where I have left some here with negative painting, in other places it's just easier to put it in with a bit of titanium white and a rigger brush. So let's do that now. I've got some titanium white here, but I don't want to use it straight out of the tube. It'll look too bright and chemically. Not sure that's a proper word, but I like it. So let's use it. Some yellow ochre in there. Yellow ochre is good because it's a fairly opaque pigment, and so it contributes to the opacity of this overall mix that I'm creating here. Something like that should do the trick. And we only want a little bit of this in a few places. Now I said that maybe one of the rungs at the bottom of the ladder here could work quite nicely. Yeah. I might put in some lines along here, a couple more posts. And then there's this whole mix of supports and things up here. I don't want to go crazy with this, but they are there. This one comes back to here. I might just dash something along there actually. Yeah. We've got a nice rope that's coming off one of these supports. Let's say it's up here somewhere. That will have a nice shape running across there. So let's say it's coming up here. Now what I might do while I've got some of this is just pick out a few reeds through the back here, but you have to be very careful with this because the temptation can be to do all of them. So just a few, just adds a little bit of suggestion that you've got reeds growing up here. No more than that. A few little bits of detail in front of that dark look quite nice. Could be cow parsley, anything just growing up through there. It's just a nice little counter change. Okay, I'm at the point where I think this is pretty much there, but I just want to put a little bit of detail on the farmhouse here. Not much, but just a little suggestion that there's a three-dimensional element to the building there. And then just a little line for the roof. No more than that. And then I'm going to have a look at the bank here and consider whether or not I need to define anything here. Maybe just one or two crisp little marks would be helpful. You really do need to make sure with little areas of detail like this that you keep them closer to the focal point or towards the foreground if you can. You don't want to put marks like this all the way back here. Otherwise you start upsetting the sense of balance and the illusion of depth in the painting. So you have to be very careful when you do this. But these marks are useful. They help to give the painting a little bit of zip. And of course there'll be some down on the little area of shore here, whether it's bits of old rope or mud, weeds and things, pebbles that collect along here. And I do want to put some of this detritus that collects and floats down the river because it really does sum up what it's like being on the River Arun. Seeing these twigs, branches, collections of leaves and things just floating down the river. I don't know why, it's just rather enjoyable. And it's all part of this. So I'm going to put something here. Bear in mind that this will be reflecting ever so slightly, so drag it down on the bottom edge. See that I'm just touching the underside of that mark, as I'm doing here too, with a damp brush, just dragging it down into that ripple. And it makes it look as though it is actually sitting in the water. Similar to the process that I used to do the reflections on the boats. It's the same thing after all. It's something that is sitting on top of the surface and reflecting in it. Now I need to come further up here with these railings just as a final adjustment. Now, there always comes a point in a painting where you have to put this little rigger brush down. As much fun as it is going around making all these little marks, putting some detail on, we run the risk of choking the life out of the painting if we're not judicious in where we put our marks and where we place our detail. So I'm going to leave it here. I might put 1 or 2 marks on, but it's highly likely that it will be left as it is. And the reason I know that is because I'm starting to look around now and find things to paint. When you do that, you know that it's pretty much time to stop. So let's call it a day. I'll have a cup of tea and then I'll maybe look at it again in the morning and see where we are. But I think we're done. Okay, so we're done. The painting's finished, and that brings the series to a conclusion. I hope you found it helpful to give you an insight into what's required to paint complex landscape scenes in watercolour. Now, even though this has taken a number of videos and we've gone through a lot of different stages, what I've tried to show you is the importance of having a structure, a strategy, some methodology to the way that you paint. Now, of course, much of the ideas and the teaching that I've shown you in these videos comes from a place that is instinctive to me, because I've developed these techniques and these strategies over the years. And more often than not, I'll do a quick painting that only takes an hour or two, sometimes even less, a quick sketch, but all the time these thoughts are in my head. I'm planning my washes. I'm considering the potential issues and the potential problems that might arise with regard to the edges in the scene that I'm painting. I'll be thinking about the edges that I want to keep or the ones that I can lose. I'll be thinking about where my lightest lights are. I'll be thinking about where my darkest darks are and how these might interact. But what I've shown you in this painting is how that all plays out in practice and with a complex subject. And what I hope you take away from this is a set of ideas that you can then use in your own paintings with your own subjects. I have had some communication from various of you saying that you need to finish this up, Ollie, so I can finish my painting quickly, or I think I've almost finished it and it's not quite as good as yours, but can you have a look at it and give me some comments on it? Well, that's kind of missing the point of this particular series. I haven't done it as an exercise for you to paint along and follow along to, but rather to give you some structure, some strategies, some insights into what is required in the planning process when you're painting watercolours. Take those ideas and use them for yourself. Use them as core skills or techniques that you can either use or develop or modify to something that you find works for you, but ultimately will enable you to paint the subjects that you want to paint. By all means, have a go at painting this for your own benefit and your own learning, but ultimately try to take those techniques and develop them for yourself. Thanks once again for watching. Thanks once again for staying the course across these videos. I hope you found them helpful. If you've enjoyed this video and the other videos, please give them a thumbs up. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel and you've enjoyed watching, then please subscribe. That really helps the channel. So that's it from me for now. Happy painting, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.